Welcome back to the Shared Practices podcast. Today we are doing another episode of Ask George. And on our episode today, what we're going to talk about is leadership. And leadership is a really loaded topic. That's not necessarily something that's like a, one size fits all, or also, really something that's a singular topic. And so we're going to kind of break it up into pieces and really digest a huge topic, which is, leading your business, leading your practice, and ultimately leading your team to success. And so this is a topic that, there's many different ways you can tackle it. You can talk about the vision. You could talk about strategy. You could talk about management of people. You could talk about culture. You could talk about development of people. And you could talk about operational leadership. Like there's just so many different aspects to leadership. And so I want to just kind of walk through all the different areas and try to use examples where it's going to be helpful for you as a dentist who's in a practice, leading your team to ultimately get to your goals. And so I think the first thing that I want to talk about, which is like self-leadership or introspection. And there's a few things that, it starts within you. And so there's a few things that you need to be clear on within yourself that will allow you to be the best leader possible. The first thing is who you are, what you like, and, the things that make you you. And I think that's, you might think like, why does that matter? Well, if you're trying to be somebody you're not going to be as good or as authentic, or you're not going to connect with people as genuinely as if you're trying to bring out the best version of yourself. And so when I think of leadership, I really think about, okay, well, we're going to take the best version of me, and it's going to be an embodiment of who I am, but it's going to be that embodiment of who I am transposed upon my practice and my teams to get my goals. And so let me just use a couple of examples, right? So I'm going to speak on myself, and I'm just doing this because to show you, right? I'm not trying to, you have to figure out within yourself. So I'm very introverted naturally, which is maybe different than most people might think because I'm on a podcast and I talk. But like, I'm actually very naturally introverted. And so for me, I also have that ability to be social, but like within myself, I know I'm an introverted person. And so, when I'm thinking about, the problems that I have or surrounding myself with a team, I tend to like to, so I'm very introverted. I'm also not very detail oriented. I tend to be more big picture in my thinking, and I tend to like to strategize. Those are like, that's kind of just like the general makeup of me. And so when I'm thinking about that, I'm like, okay, well, I want to bring out the best version of me as a leader. And so that introverted side, what that tends to do is it tends to be empowering of others. I like to really empower others because I don't necessarily want to be the end all be all for everybody. I want to have other people step into those roles. And so, I think a very good compliment to me, like for example, right? If you are the dentist owner of your practice, you need to think of an office manager type position that is going to complement you so that you can naturally be your style of leadership. And then in the areas where maybe you would like support from additional leaders in the practice, then you can have like an office manager sort of supplement that. And so in my situation, I would want somebody who's very detail oriented. And I also want somebody who's very extroverted or not extroverted necessarily, but is going to go have those conversations with people. I don't want to be having the conversations with all the team members about all the little things. I would like, I'm more introverted. I like to keep to myself. I want somebody else who's going to go out there and have those conversations with those team members. And so that's where understanding yourself helps you do a couple of things. It helps you understand, how do I bring out the most in my leadership? And then also it helps you understand, where do I need to get other people to do the things that I don't want to do naturally or I'm not naturally good at? And so that's sort of the first thing. So that first thing, we'll call it self-leadership. But that first thing is understanding yourself as a leader and making sure that you're bringing out the best version of you, not trying to change you. And, it's like people have strengths and weaknesses, right? That person who's very social, very gregarious, very energetic, right? They could use those qualities to their advantage to essentially like interact with and like spread that, that good vibe that they generate all around the team and the culture, and they can have that energy move the business forward, right? And then there's the other people who may be more reserved. They can maybe be more quiet and empower others and have more of a different type of culture or vibe. But it should really start with who you are, and that should be kind of a core element. And so another core element is your vision, right? So What do you want for your practice? Because ultimately, the leader of a business, and this is now where we're kind of blending more strategy now, right? But when you are the leader of a business and you are the owner of that practice or that organization or multiple practices or whatever size of, you either have maybe a small office, a larger office, multiple practices, whatever it might be, you as the leader, it's your job to be clear. When people want to know what to do, they look to you. When people want to know where we're going, they look to you. When people want to know what our goals are, they look to you, right? So you are the one that needs to have the answers for the types of questions that businesses should know, which is, what are our goals? Where are we going? What's the future look like? What's our mission, vision, and core values? And so the leader needs to provide this clarity to their team. They need to say, okay, well, we're going to go to a group practice. Right now, I'm a solo dentist. And, the reason I want that is because I want us to be a great, staple in the community as a practice that offers convenience and is available and has great team members, a great culture, a great place for patients to get care. Like, this is where I would want my family to go. This is where I'd want my family's family to go. And so, like, this is the type of practice we're trying to create, a staple in the community, right? So the owner is the person that sets that vision and then creates a mission, vision, core values, and a structure that allows people to get onboarded. And so, like, for this exercise, the best way that I would think about it is think about onboarding somebody new, right? So, like, when people, like, so there's this, like, casual, informal nature that develops with team members that we've had for a while. And when we get somebody new on our team, that's our opportunity to really show them who we are and what we do. So imagine, like, orientation in your practice of the future, the practice you're trying to build, right? What are you going to say to people as they're onboarding? Like, why is this an awesome place to work? Why do you guys do awesome patient care? Why is this a great culture? Like, imagine, like, the perfect version of your practice, and imagine onboarding somebody to that perfect version of your practice. Like, what are you telling them about the practice? That's just kind of a little helpful prompt for you to really figure out what you're trying to, how to communicate that. But at the end of the day, you need to have a vision. And, we at Shared Practices, we like to establish what we call vision avatars, because oftentimes dentists can get a little confused with this, like, kind of nebulous or not tangible task of, like, what's your vision, right? So we have, like, the productive solo, we have a smart solo, we have a profitable group, we have a pseudo specialist model in a group practice. And then we also have, the mega group. That's kind of like our vision avatars that we think are really good spots for dentists to strive for in a group practice or a solo practice or any single practice. And so, use our vision avatars to help yourself identify, what am I shooting for? And then communicate that to your team. And then your job as the leader is to be steadfast in that vision, right? It's the leader's job when there's, so, like, I'll give you an example. I was, at this time in my journey, I was a solo dentist, and I was trying to get into that group practice. And I was trying to open up Fridays. And I had this front office team member who came into my office, and she's like, I have a lot of concerns about Fridays. I'm already struggling to fill the schedule on the other days. And I'm not really able to, I don't see that this is a good idea for the practice. And it's like, well, I think that she's also saying that because she doesn't want to work Fridays, but, like, that aside. So, she says that. And then I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm the leader of the practice. This is my vision. My vision is a group practice. Group practices require Fridays. So, like, that's it. And so that was somewhat of my response, is like, and so, anytime, and this is just like a small tidbit, anytime, like, somebody comes with resistance like this to you, the leader, you have to say, this is what we're not negotiating on, and then this is what I'll negotiate on. And so in this situation, I'm not negotiating on the fact that Fridays are necessary, because my vision is a group practice, and my job as the leader is to set that vision and be convicted in it and believe in it all the time, even when it doesn't look like it's going to happen. And also, I understand your point about the fact that we probably don't have enough patient flow to open up Fridays. And so I'm going to research that. I'm going to take a look at it. I'm going to get a plan on how we're going to fill those Fridays, and I'll circle back with you. And that way, the team member feels like, okay, well, I was heard, I was acknowledged, not dismissed, and also my concern is going to get addressed. But we're still keeping Fridays. And so that's kind of just a small tidbit is, you as the leader, you're setting the why, right? Why are we opening Fridays? Because it's a group practice, and group practices financially need to be open on Fridays. Okay. Now, the how and the what, I'll be malleable in those areas, right? And so now we're kind of transitioning to another type of leadership, which is relational leadership, right? Which is getting that trust and influence within your team. And so I want to kind of explain the difference between authority and influence. So authority, you have authority. If you are the owner of the practice, you have the authority to make many different decisions. You have the authority to cut people. You have authority to hire people. You have authority to change their pay. You have authority to manage the expenses. You have a lot of authority in a private practice, right? Because that's the benefit. It's called private practice. And the owner of that practice has a lot of authority and rights. Now, there's another term, influence. Influence is completely different. It's more about credibility and buy-in. And so influence is, what do people think about me? And when I say something, how much weight do they give to what I say? So, for example, if I say, like, we're doing this, well, they're like, well, he has the authority to tell us what to do, but are we going to do it with our sense of ownership? And are we going to do it really bought into what we're doing and why? Or are we just going to do it kind of half effort because of the fact that we're told to from the person who has authority? The difference is your influence. And influence and credibility in getting that buy-in from your team, that occurs through multiple different actions, right? So the first one is going to be you leading by example, right? So for example, if I'm going to sit down with my team and say, like, look, we're going to work really hard. We're going to do same-day dentistry. We're going to do all these things. And then in the middle of the chaos of the day, they watch me, and I'm doing the little things that make the day flow when things are tight. Then, like, for example, let's just say, I'm going to help, like, clean up a room, or I'm going to help do something just to get things moving when I'm pushing the schedule. Well, then they're going to be like, okay, like, he's making us do these things, but he also does them too. So that's going to reflect well. Right? So you want to lead by example, as in the things you're asking your team members to do, you want to do those things as well. Another one is, let's just say, like, we talked about reappointment rate a lot. In Shared Practice Podcast, we deeply believe in the importance of reappointing. And so if we're really deeply believing in the importance of reappointing, and you walk into a hygiene exam and a patient hasn't made that next appointment, you can push through their objections to try to get that appointment, build value for that next visit, and overcome whatever objections are preventing them from scheduling that next visit. That's you leading by example, where you say reappointment is important, and in your actions, you're showing through your example of your leadership that your reappointment is important. And then what happens when there's a really strong leader who leads by examples, they gain just respect. Right? Like, you just really respect somebody who shows up every day with the discipline to do the right thing at the right time consistently. And then when they say to do something, it's like, okay, well, there's just a different level of respect that you have for that person and that request. And it's going to help with that credibility and that buy-in. So that's the first thing, lead by example. The second thing is about building relationships, right? One of the things that I often tell new owners is I say, know, like, trust is one of your most important things early. Right, when you first buy a practice, I can tell you my experience. I walked into this office, and my sellers, had told the team the prior day. And so I'm walking in, and and that's customary, right? You tell the team short notice. So you're going to meet the team right after they've been informed, which is the way it's supposed to work, but it's also not necessarily putting you in a great position to be successful because they haven't had a whole lot of time to process. And so, I have people, they've got their, like, tears in their eyes, all of that stuff. And at the end of the day, they're looking at me, and I just feel, like, deeply overwhelmed. And then over time, over the first, like, 2 to 3 weeks, I very organically was really focused on building that know, like, trust within the team, where we were having conversations. I was asking them questions. We were asking them about their weekend, asking them about, ask for feedback. And that's the thing, like, asking for feedback from your team members and listening to that feedback is a massive trust builder because they feel heard and acknowledged. And so, in this situation, right, I was just getting to know my team organically, right? These are people I'm going to be working with. I wanted to get to know them. And so that builds that know, like, trust and that relationship between you and the team members and the team as a whole, where it's just going to, like, it's going to create more of that influence, right? Where they're going to feel like you care. And, I think that there's a line here, right? You want to care about their professional development, but, like, you also kind of have to put a boundary in place and a professionalism boundary about their personal lives, right? A lot of dental office team members, their personal lives, they bleed into the practice. And I think as the owner, it can sometimes be tempting to go down the road of caring about them so much so that now you care about what's going on in their personal life. And you should know about their personal life. You should ask them about it if you're wanting to kind of engage in conversation. But like, if they're having, you kind of have to maintain a professionalism boundary there. And that's something that I've learned with time. I think it's very easy for new owners to just want the relationship with the staff to be great. And so we're going to like kind of, get involved in emotionally and, mentally invested in what's going on in their lives outside of the office. And I do think that that's just kind of a good boundary to set, is like, it's my job to pour into you professionally. And it's my job to grow your professional development and to grow your career and to make your work satisfaction as high as it can be. But like once you leave the office, that's kind of where my oversight ends. And so just kind of a tidbit there, I think that that's kind of just a generally good thing to kind of have as a bit of a boundary. And so, we're back to talking about trust, building that trust with team members. And the other thing, and this is something, is most team members, well, this is what happens. Feedback flows up. So, for example, if you have a dental assistant and you have a dental assistant lead, and then you have an office manager, and then you have you in like an organization chart, hopefully a good flow of information is the dental assistant will tell the dental assistant lead a problem. If the dental assistant lead can't solve that problem, then it'll get escalated to the office manager. Then it gets escalated to the owner. So what happens is you want that flow of information, right? People generally want to avoid problems, especially owners who like to remain in an optimistic headspace. They don't like it when their team members bring them issues. And I think one thing is you should always encourage people to bring you issues alongside solutions, right? You should always train your team. Is if they're going to bring you a problem, you say, okay, I acknowledge that this is a real problem. Now, do you have a potential solution? And just kind of train your team on bringing problem and solution. But either way, most team members feel like they've been dismissed because they feel like they'll bring the owner a problem, and then the owner's like, it's not really a real problem. And they're like, well, but it is. It is to me. It is in my world. I'm bringing it to you for a reason. And they like super common that owners and leaders who have work to do will be dismissive in an effort to either avoid the problem, or they're just not empathizing enough with the person who's in the role experiencing the problem. But that breaks trust, right? Because trust requires that I can bring something to you and that something good is going to happen. And like, there's many times people have brought something to me and like, I did not agree with their assessment. But I sit there and take the time to talk through the issue completely with them to make sure that we're aligned at the end of the conversation. And so the way that you handle conflict, the way that you handle feedback, and the way that you essentially communicate with your team and manage those relationships, that's going to build your trust and influence. And if it's like these are like, you're putting, there's this like Goodwill like deposits into the account, right? So you and your team, there's like kind of a metaphorical account where if you are, if they come to you with a problem and you ask them, okay, like, can you bring me a problem and a solution? And then they bring you the problem and the solution, and you work with it, you acknowledge them, you thank them for bringing you the problem, and then you provide them with a solution in place, and then you put a solution in place, and then you follow up with them, right? Like that would be an ideal interaction. All of that deposits positive goodwill into your relationship with that team member. Then when you need to have the conversation with the team member and say, okay, like I need you to do a little something extra. I know what you're doing, you're doing a great job, but I need you to add this to your plate, and we're not going to add you an additional compensation or anything. You're just going to add this function, right? You're going to add a checklist, or you're going to add this recurring duty once a week, or whatever it is. What's going to happen is that team member, you're withdrawing a little bit from that account. And so you think about you as a leader have a metaphorical account with your team, with each individual team member and your team as a whole. And you can deposit into that account through good behavior, leading by example, listening to them, coaching them, developing them, all of that, right? And I think that you can also withdraw from that account as asking them to do things, giving them negative feedback, maybe making changes that are disruptive, that aren't team favorable, but necessary for the business, right? Those are withdrawals. And so you kind of want to manage that account balance, so to speak, to make sure that at any given time, you've put in more goodwill into the team than you're taking out so that that culture remains healthy. So let's talk about culture. Culture is one of those things that I think is there's like the spoken culture and the unspoken culture, right? And the spoken culture should be your core values. It should be the things that and your core values, the thing I've learned is you have to repeat them over and over and over again. I've learned this from Alex, who's our CEO, who has repeated the cultural elements of SPG just really ad nauseum. And at first I was like, wow, he's being quite repetitive with this. But then you realize over time that you have to be very repetitive because of the fact that that leads to excellent performance with your team. And also that leads to them being able to repeat the core values themselves. It's one of those things that needs to be repeated over and over again, right? So I'm on meetings and now I have team members telling me the core values, right? And that's because our leader has repeated them so many times that the team has internalized them and is now regurgitating them back. And so that's the spoken core values. And the spoken culture are those things that you're defining, you're saying this is how we do things, right? But there's also like what's really going on, and that's the unspoken culture. That's what behavior is tolerated. Just a list of things, right? Like, have you given people very clear expectations on their role? Right? Clarity is something that's more of an unspoken culture, but super important, right? Like, have we given this person everything they need to succeed? I had one person come to me in a mastermind call and they said, I'm frustrated with team member, and I said, okay, well, like before we talk about the team member, let's talk about what you've done to the team member. So like, have you provided that team member with the clarity of what is required on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis from them to make sure that they know what they're responsible for? And in this situation, they hadn't. I said, okay, well, like, that is setting up an unspoken culture of a lack of clarity. And so that lack of clarity is going to lead to mismanaged expectations, which is going to make it difficult for them to really give you what you're looking for. And so clarity is one of the unspoken things. It's like we need to have each team member have very clear roles, responsibilities, and we also need to have what's tolerated. So this is like, what you tolerate. So one of my favorite sayings is you get what you tolerate. And, at the end of the day, people are going to, especially your not so strong performers, like you're going to have the strong performers that are your best, right? Like think if you have 4 hygienists, there's going to be that gunner that is just like every single time you walk in, intraoral photos are perfect, has talked to patient about everything, her perio charting is on point. Like she is just excellent in every way, right? There's definitely those team members. Those team members, this is not as important for. But then there's the other team members who clock in, clock out. It's more of a... they just go through the motions more. And for that person, it's all about raising the floor, right? You're going to have both on your team and both have their place. But like you need to have a floor of performance that is high, right? Because that's ultimately going to lead to like your success should be based on your floor. You should be having a high floor, which means we have processes, we have systems, we have things that people do every single time that make it that we don't need an all-star at every position to have success. And so that's going to be what you tolerate. And so if you walk into a room and a hygienist has not taken the intraoral pictures and they have not talked to the patient about their perio and they have not done all of these different things, well, then you're not really putting that person in a, like, you're tolerating a lot. Right? And you need to, let's just say it happens once, you pull them aside, you say, hey, just so you know, this was not acceptable. Like my expectation is that when I walk into an exam, if there's an issue, the intraoral photo is up on the computer screen, the patient has been informed on the situation, and I've been told what's going on so that I can come in and have an effective exam. Right? And like, yeah, that's a negative goodwill interaction, right? You're taking out of the account in having that conversation. However, you are also really making it clear what you tolerate. And, I do think it's the unspoken culture. You do get what you tolerate. And so you need to kind of raise your standards and have standards that are high. And then the last thing I'd say on leadership on this topic is meetings, collaboration, and alignment, right? Like having some type of rhythm in your office to have meetings at a certain cadence, right? A morning huddle, weekly department meeting, monthly office meeting, whatever it is. But like need to have some type of cadence to that so that there's a place and an opportunity for you guys to come back, get reconnected. That's also like the spoken and unspoken culture is, how collaborative and aligned are we as a team? And that's going to be a kind of a really big thing. And then, I think to the, maybe the last thing I'll talk about. So we've kind of, let's go through kind of the things I've discussed, right? I've talked about your self-leadership, understanding yourself, understanding your vision for your practice. We've talked about relational leadership, having that trust and influence within your team. You have the authority, but do you have influence? Do you have them? Are you credible? Are they going to buy into what you say just because you're saying it? And then we're going to have like the people development side of things, right? Growing people. That should be every leader's goal, is to grow their team professionally into the best version of themselves. And that's through listening to their feedback, building that trust between you and that team member, providing coaching and feedback, giving constant feedback. That's going to be super important. And then, this all translates into operations and into execution in terms of what you do, right? It's kind of interesting that, like, when you think about it, the majority of the leadership that you do on a day in, day out basis is very, very minute, small actions, right? Where it's like, what should we do in this situation? What marketing company should we use here? What is our, like all these little decisions that you make day in and day out that are going to drive your business forward. The front office is going to ask you, how do we manage this? All of these different things. That is where you have to have excellent understanding of where you're going long term and find a way to distill that down into answering these small questions. So for example, let's just say a team member comes to you and says, okay, well, we're hiring for a hygienist, but they're only available 2 days a week. And, what are we going to do? Are we going to interview for another person? This person seems really ideal. What about something else? This is a decision that's going to come up. And then you as the leader say, okay, what is my vision? What is required for my vision? And then distill that down to a micro decision, like, should we hire this particular hygienist or keep interviewing? And you say, okay, well, if this hygienist could potentially plug into my long-term vision, then I proceed. If this hygienist potentially, her hours and days of the week are just not going to work, like if we bring her on these 2 days, the schedule is going to get all funky and then we can't add someone else, they're unwilling to leave their other job, this doesn't work for us, then you need to have that discipline to say no. And so I think that, that operational leadership is going to be very important as well, because through operations, there's just so many different small things that are going to come up, whether that is prioritization and focus. For example, on any given month, what are your dental assistants, hygienists, and front office team members focused on, right? That's operational leadership, making sure that you know what is your vision, what's the bottleneck in the way of getting to your vision, and then how do I have my team help navigate that bottleneck? Right, so this is probably a topic for another episode where we could distill it down into more detail. But at the end of the day, your operational leadership is going to be your prioritization and focus, your accountability systems. So your scorecards per team member, your roles and responsibilities, your quarterly structure of feedback, whatever your feedback mechanism is to let people know how they're doing, whatever metrics you track, the processes and SOPs that you have in place, the decision-making process. Do you have a decision-making process where teams can make decisions without you? All of that stuff is going to be more detailed execution, operational leadership. And that's going to be another sort of genre of leadership as well. And so you can see as going through this episode, right, I've tried to take a whole episode to explain this concept of leadership to you. And you can see how it's kind of complex. I mean, there's levels of detail to this where we can go have a full episode on any of like the 5 or 6 different things I discussed. We could have a whole episode on self-leadership, a whole episode on understanding who you are and how to get clear on who you are as a leader. We could have a whole episode on vision identification. We could have a whole episode on taking your vision and really understanding how to get it in action so that you take that vision and you put it in action, and the day-to-day minute decisions that you're making are connected to your vision. So that, if you think about your team as rowing a rowboat, every little stroke of the oar is pushing your boat just a little bit forward towards where you want to go long-term. Again, I could probably talk for a whole hour about the concept of relational leadership and building that trust and credibility, especially around feedback management and encouraging your team to give feedback and listening to that feedback and acting on it, right? Because your team members, they need that trust. They need to know that when I say something to the team, they say, okay, like he's serious. And when they say something to me, well, we can trust him. We can tell him this thing and something good is going to happen. And so, that could be a whole episode in and of itself, right? So this is such a big topic. You think of people development, right? Growing your team, having your team like really develop over time, right? And I think that's probably the sign of some of the best leaders is when they have those people that have been with them for multiple years. And then you talk to their team members and they say, man, when I came to this company, I was working, I came in at this level and then I just grew with this organization and now I'm so capable. I built all these skills. And like there's this gratitude that people who you've developed have for you and the business because they've grown professionally throughout this time. And also, those are some of the best people to have in your company long term because of the fact that they are very grateful and they also know all of this stuff. Like when someone starts at a lower level in a company and elevates their skill level or their qualifications, they've picked up skills at every level. And so they are more well-rounded. They understand the nuances of the business better. They're higher performing team members. And oftentimes, it's financially more advantageous to bring someone in and develop them rather than to bring someone in fully developed. So people development is an excellent leadership quality and something that, frankly, we could talk about for a whole episode as well. Team leadership, right? The way that you lead the team, the cadence, the meetings, the roles and responsibilities, the cultural normals, the spoken culture, the unspoken culture, also a whole episode could be done in that topic. And then the way that you execute and you lead operations, that could in and of itself be a whole episode, right? How do you prioritize teams? How do you put together accountability systems? How do you get metrics in place? How do you have SOPs and processes in place? All of that could be a whole nother topic. And then you have strategic leadership, right? Strategy. That's like one of my favorite parts of leadership is, thinking through the strategic decisions and having a lot of leverage in your thought. So another whole episode, right? You see this topic of leadership is massive. And it's one of those things that what I tried to do in this episode is just give you like a flavor of all of the different topics. But, leadership in of itself is going to be one of the very important things where they say great culture beats great strategy 10 days out of the week. So it's like one of those things that if you have a group of people who are all aligned and, that's ultimately the last thing I'll leave you with. You're like, wow, this episode was about a whole lot of things. You are correct. And the thing that I'd leave you with is this idea that leadership at its highest level is resource allocation. And so you are allocating you are sort of in charge of all of the resources of the business, the financial resources and the people resources mainly, right? So you're timing, how do we allocate our investments? How do we reinvest profits? How do we, make financial decisions? And also, how do we allocate our people? What are our people doing? What are our people focused on? How are we leading them, right? So, your leadership of your team and getting the most out of your team is going to bring out the best in your leadership. And so, I hope that this episode was helpful and it just gave you a flavor of the different areas. And what I would encourage you to do is I'd encourage you to go through that list again. Self-leadership and vision identification, relational leadership, trust and influence within your team, people development, developing your people through feedback and coaching, team leadership, spoken and unspoken culture, operating rhythms, meetings, alignment, and operational leadership, prioritization, focus, accountability systems, and KPIs, scorecards, right? Those are all the different areas of leadership. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to just ask yourself, how am I at each of those categories? And just rate yourself and try to identify your weaknesses and then try to focus on those and try to level yourself up. And hopefully this episode was a good guide. So thanks for listening to another episode of the Shared Practices podcast. I encourage you to come back. We're going to be here producing more content. And if you have any questions or anything that you want on the podcast, email team@sharedpractices.com. And we're going to get your desired topics featured on the show. Thanks for listening.